Good evening. My name is Anthony Clifton. We've taught this class before. Tonight we're going to be discussing Unit 6, which is CERT organization. Glad to have everybody out tonight. The last class that you had talked about some basics of interior search and rescue. Do y'all have any questions about that? Anything that was failed to be covered during that time?
Basically, if it's structurally not sound, don't do it.
That's the big deal. Make sure that if there is any doubt as to the integrity of the structure, you got to make sure it's safe before you enter. And especially if you're in management, if you're a team leader, make sure that none of your people are allowed to go in without. Make sure the building's ready to go. Your primary role as a CERT member during that phase of the rescue is to ensure safety of yourself and to your team members and try to identify what needs to be done later on.
I like to use the old rule, if you have to question it, don't do it.
That's an excellent rule. If you have to question, don't do it.
Because it's not right.
So, anybody else? Any other questions? Okay. So, we will get started with tonight. Like I say, this is basic training Unit 6. Tonight our objectives are to describe the CERT structure, to identify how CERT interrelates with the incident command system, and explain documentation requirements as a CERT member. The topics include the CERT organization, mobilization, and documentation. You got to remember that CERT operations, like everything else in an emergency response, relies heavily on communications. Communications is one of the most critical aspects that we're going to have to contend with during any rescue operation, whether it be during an event, it could be a pre-planned event, but keep in mind that communications is going to be the key to having a successful operation. On-scene management includes maintain safety of your workers. You want to provide a clear leadership and an organized structure and improve effectiveness of your rescue efforts. So when we say maintain the safety of disaster workers, what are we talking about? Remember, the first rule of rescue is protect the rescue. So your key as a CERT member is to make sure that everybody is accounted for. You want to make sure that they have proper personal protective equipment in place. You want to use the buddy system in a response. In other words, you want to team people up. Don't ever send anybody out in a response on their own. You want to know what the capability of that team is. You want to know what level of training they have. You want to know what their abilities are to size up a situation and then affect an appropriate response to it. When we talk about providing, yes, sir.
Now, do we have to worry about preservation of potential scenes, just in case there's, like in this disaster, you know, sometimes it could be a crime scene that,
Right.
or if we're coming up on something, do we need to worry about actually preservation of the scene sometimes?
A lot of that depends on, not a lot, all of it really depends on what kind of scene you're going into. So if there is any kind of indication that would lead you to believe that this event was terrorist related, that automatically gives you a heightened sense that, yes, everything is potentially evidence. We know that terrorism domestically is handled by the FBI, so we know they're going to be doing the investigation. So you do have to treat everything, the entire scene, and that includes patients, that includes deceased persons, that includes debris, all as evidence. Now, if there's no indication, if it's clearly a natural event, so let's say it's a tornado, a hurricane, a flood, some natural act of God, you have to think that it's not going to be as bad, that it's going to be, more of a rescue kind of scene than it is a preservation scene. Now, with that said, even in the case of terrorism, do not let the threat hamper your response, particularly to life safety issues. Now, when it comes to instant stabilization, property preservation, once we get on down into the event, that's where the evidence would really come into play. But do not let the worry about evidence affect your ability to do those life-saving measures. So, but yes, it is a consideration, but it's not your first consideration.
I guess what I was trying to get sometimes is some of the natural disasters that people are trying to dispose of other people and saying, trying to, maybe I'm looking too deep into this.
Well, yes and no. I mean, there's always that element of hidden agendas out there, so yes, be aware of that. And do note, I mean, you can run across some really odd things during a disaster. If that happens, you want to make note of it. You want to make note of dates and times and places and descriptions. Yes, especially if it's odd, something you find odd. Now, again, people will do odd things. But so let's take let's say it's a tornado, for example, and you have unidentified people in the area. Could they be looters? Will they be looters? Yes, that's absolutely that's a horrible thing, but it does happen. That's just a fact of life. And so what you want to do is, if you find somebody there, you want to ask them, is this your home? Is this your residence? Anybody here? Who's here with you? Why are you here? And if somebody's carrying, the guns, the family jewelry, the safe out of the house, and that's all they've got, that might be an indication that you might want to notify authorities. It's not like you would want to confront these folks, but you would want to get all the information you could. So if you see a make of a car, you've got a description of a person, you've got a tag number that you can relay on to authorities. That is one of the things when you're looking at incident command, and you've got, again, life safety is the first priority. Second priority is incident stabilization. Part of that incident stabilization piece is getting a scene security, getting the area blocked off, identifying everybody who's coming into the area so that we are able to have accountability. So, and of course, that's part of it. The next thing we talk about is improving effectiveness of rescue efforts. That's what we do, is we want to improve our effectiveness and make those rescue efforts go as far as we can. We want to do the greatest amount of good with the least amount of resources we have on hand for the greatest number of people. So when we start talking about on-scene management, you're looking at, you want to look for a well-defined management structure. So what does that mean? Well-defined management structure.
Someplace to run your.
Well, kind of, not really. We're not looking at as much at a place as we are the structure of how we're organized. Okay, so we want to be well defined before the event ever gets here. So as a team, we would want to make sure we practice. We want to make sure that we've got we know who's in charge, what their areas of responsibility are, and if we can do that up front, we'll be much better off during an event. So a well-defined management structure means that we have an idea of what we're going to do before the event starts. That when we meet each other, the first time is not going to be on the scene. We need to do some pre-planning. We need to do some drills. We need to do some, have a discussion before actually meeting on the scene for the very first time. And one of the things that management structure means is incorporating the possibility of the incident command system. We've talked a lot about incident command in the past, but that's why it's so important, is it gives us that structure by which to get organized, which includes, you know, a manageable span of control. Remember when we talked about ICS a little bit before, we talked about span of control? What are we talking about, span of control?
One person for 5 people.
Right. That's how many people we can effectively control. So according to the instant command system, 3 to 7 people is our span of control, with 5 being the optimal number. And so when we're talking about that differs a little bit from unity of command. Now, what's unity of command?
You know who your boss is.
Everybody has one boss, and that one boss is it. You don't answer to 2 bosses. So span of control is how many, and unity of command means everybody has one boss all the way down the line. Now, common terminology. When we're talking about using common terminology, why is that important on the scene?
Because everyone knows.
Everybody can understand.
Everybody-
Right, everybody can.
We're not speaking in 5 different languages.
Exactly. You know, there are areas in the country where you go and you say, send me a bus, and what you're going to get is an ambulance. Okay? Now, here, you say, send me a bus, what are you going to get? You're going to get a school bus or a passenger bus. You're going to get a bus. Okay? Other places you ask for a bus, and you may get, a police vehicle. So we ought to make sure that we're using the same terminology. Now, there again, even with that, you say ambulance. What are we talking about, ambulance? There can be different ambulances. So we could have a mass care ambulance, which could be BLS, ALS, it could be an ambulance, but a non-transport unit. So there's a lot of things that you have to look at when you start talking about common terminology. And that's exactly right, is you want to make sure that everybody is speaking that same language. In medical terminology, and and in medicine, that's one of the places you hear a lot of people. In a hospital, you hear the term code blue, and that's usually meant to be somebody doing CPR. At another hospital, though, code blue may mean a fire alarm. It doesn't matter. There again, a good example of that for those of you in the rescue business. You've heard the ambulance say, we're en route to the hospital, code 3. Well, what's code 3 mean? It means lights and siren. Or in some places, code 3 means no lights, no siren. It means nothing. Code 1 means lights and siren. So you've got to make sure that everybody's talking the same language, so that you don't wind up not communicating well on the scene. And so that's what constitutes effective communication. So if you're going to be effective, you want to make sure that remember the definition of communication is the sending and receiving of messages. So it's not just that you're saying it, it's that everybody's understanding it. The other thing that we run into a lot of times is we hear about 10 codes. 10-4, 10-2, 10-8, 10-24, NIMS, the National Instant Management System, the very first item that it says is eliminate 10 codes. It says use plain language. That's one of the very first things that it called for, because again, in different areas, you can wind up with 10 codes meaning something different. I actually had that happened to me once, because I had gotten used to one area where I was working, and we used 10 codes. And I went to another area. I used the same 10 codes. I got excited and used what I was used to, went back to the 10 codes. And then suddenly I had police cars pulling in, because what I had said in this new area was that I was involved in a domestic dispute over a cow. And what I was actually trying to say, that I was completed the assignment and en route back to the station. And So I wound up with lots of police on the scene because I was involved in a domestic dispute over a cow. So it was interesting, but it does happen, and that's what happens. That's one of the very reasons that we go to plain language for effective communication. It talks about consolidated action plans. When we talk about action plans, what are we talking about? Action plan.
It's our pre-rehearsed drills, I guess, that we have set up.
Kind of, but what it means, what it's talking about in this situation is that an action plan is that somebody, whoever the leader is, has made a plan of some kind. He has an objective in mind, and that we are effective in carrying out that plan. Another consideration for on-scene management is comprehensive resource management. There's a mouthful. What does that mean? Comprehensive resource.
Using all the resources you have in the area, right?
Right. It's not, and it's not just looking at maybe your resources. It's looking at what resources are available. A lot of times we will forget. We will lose thought that we are not in this alone. There are other resources out there. There is mutual aid. We can reach out. We can reach to emergency management. We can reach to the sheriff's office, reach to the police department, reach to the fire departments, reach out to all of to the Rescue Squad Association. Not just have one idea, but keep in mind that there are lots of resources out there that we can reach out for. And so we want to look at it comprehensively, meaning the big picture, not just small. And then finally, accountability. Accountability can mean a couple of different things. One, the first thing we think about when we think about accountability is personnel. We want to make sure that our personnel are accounted for. So that's one of the first things you must do as a CERT team member when you arrive on the scene is to check in with somebody. Whoever is doing this, doing the check-in process, that's who you want to check in with. The other thing is accountability for your resources, accountability for everything on the scene. You want to make sure that those resources are accounted for, that we know where they're at and what they're doing and why they're there. If we have a piece of equipment, that the piece of equipment has to have an operator. So that's in doing that. Objectives for on-scene management. We want to identify the scope of the incident, determine a strategy, deploy our resources, and document actions and results. So identify scope. What is scope? What does that mean? How big is it? What's the problem and how big is it? Okay? Then we're going to have to determine our overall strategy. Now strategy differs a little bit. Most of us are pretty good, especially in the response area. Most of us are pretty good at tactics. What's the difference between strategy and tactics?
Strategy is sort of a plan, tactic is what you carry out.
Oh, exactly. A strategy is something, strategy is the what and tactics are the how. So if you're looking at an overall strategy, we may say our job is to clear this building, identify any victims that may be here. The tactics are how we're going to do that. That's where somebody would come up and say, you two take the first floor, you two take the second floor, you two take the third floor. That's the tactics versus the strategy. Then, once we have that, once we've got our little plan going, then we deploy our resources into the field, and then we come back and we document those results once concluded. The way we reach this, again, we've talked before about the instant command system. When you look at ICS, it's a system that works because it is management by objective. All right? Okay, what is that? What in the world is management by objective? Okay, what most of us do, what most of us try to do, is we manage by crisis. Okay, you say, well, I don't have time to set objectives. I don't have time. That takes time. Well, not really. Because once you've identified the problem, so we know that, for example, the tornado has hit. once the tornado has hit, what's the first thing we have to do?
Yeah.
We have to
set up
do,
an incident command.
well, we have to identify life safety issues. That's the first thing we do.
Make sure there's no little.
Make sure there's not another one coming. Okay, so what we've just done that quick is identified some objectives, some things that we have to get done before we can move on further. We have to do that. It's as simple as that. Now, we want to have good objectives because that's what keeps us focused. Objectives will allow us to move from 1, 2, 3, 4, and do that. Because what will invariably happen if we don't set objectives, if we don't have some idea of this is what we're going to do. So overall, the instant command system is set up to have, 3 principal things that we do: life safety, instant stabilization, and property preservation. That is the order in which we do things. So we're always going to put life safety issues first. We've got debris in the road, yes, and that's important stuff, but that's more along like property preservation. What we're worried about first is life safety. We're going to take care of those life safety issues first, then we're going to get the incident stabilized, and then we're going to worry about things like debris management. So when we set up our incident command system, if you look on page, I believe it's 6-5, you will see an outline of the incident command system. And again, this is not the first time you've seen this, but keep in mind that most cases, most of the time, the incident command system is set up where you have primarily 4 subgroups under the incident commander. And those groups are usually defined as operations, logistics, planning, and finance admin. And those are all really important things because the incident commander is the guy who is calling the shots. How do you identify that person?
Get the big hat.
He's got the big hat? Well, that worked. That's one way, yeah. Well, how would you identify an incident commander? Anybody? What about experience? The most experienced person. Okay? Now, a lot of times people say rank. The chief is always in charge, usually. Okay? But are there times when the chief may not be in charge? Yeah. Okay, because and a time like that may be, again, if we're talking about a police issue, all right? Let's say that we've got a hostage situation, it's a police issue. Is the chief necessarily in charge? Maybe not. Maybe if there's a hostage involved, he may call in his hostage negotiator. If there's, the individual barricaded himself inside the house, the SWAT team leader may be in charge. Now, it may be the chief in charge, but what I'm saying is usually you want the person in charge to be the person who has the experience to get the job done, regardless of his rank or title. For example, most of the time, if you're in a municipality, maybe the mayor is actually in charge, but the fire chief or the police chief is the incident commander. He's running the incident because he has the technical expertise. So the incident commander is identified usually as a person with experience, but the incident commander is also usually the first person there. You get to be, if you're the first on the scene, you get to be incident commander until you turn command over to somebody else. And there's 2 things required to turn over command. Any idea what those are? One is you got to have somebody that's more qualified than you are. And number 2, they have to agree to take command. Those are the 2 things that are required. And that's pretty much it. Because now there are times when somebody does not want command. So you're kind of stuck with that job until they do. Now, and a lot of people out there, particularly in the responder community, think they want to be the incident commander, and they do not. What they want to be is the operations section chief. Now, what is the operations section chief? Operations section chief is the guy who actually does whatever we're doing. Okay? Actually doing the operation. That's what most people want to be. They want to be that guy who is actually doing the operation. So if we're talking about a situation, so the tornado has come through, and I'm the incident commander, and you're the operations section chief, what are you doing? You're delegating, okay, I want the fire guys to go look inside the buildings and check for people. I want the police guys to go and close down this area to traffic. I want the EMS guys to set up a triage area, a treatment area, and a transport area. And so under operations, you could have a law enforcement branch, fire branch, rescue branch, EMS branch. You can divide those branches up. So the operations guy, that's what everybody really wants to be. The incident commander's got a much tougher job because he's got more people to deal with than just the operation. So he cannot get focused down on just the operation. He's also got to worry about logistics. What does logistics do? Logistics is the stuff people. Okay, remember, logistics are the people who go out and actually get the stuff organized. So once we are out of resources, the logistics people that's who we call to come in and get us what we need to work with. There's a planning section. What's the planning section do? Planning section does a couple of things. One is they track what we're doing right now. They begin to try to do accountability for the personnel we've got on the scene right now. They begin to form a plan for the next operational period. So whenever these folks get tired, somebody's gonna have to replace them. And the best you can do, once you get over about 12 hours, you're done. So if it looks like it's going over 12 hours, then I've got a plan on who am I going to replace the people that are out now working. How am I going to replace them? Who do I replace them with? And that means that we may have to put in, call in some mutual aid agreements, memorandums of understanding. We may have to contact the neighboring departments, but we're going to have to do that. And then we're going to have to decide, based on the objectives that the incident commander says. So let's say our objective right now is to do search and rescue of the several buildings up and down this street. That's our objective for this operational period. So the next operational period would be to do a secondary search. So planning section would begin to move everything and begin to plan for that second operational period to do the secondary search. And finally, finance admin. Finance administration, those are the folks that are responsible for tracking expenses and taking care of things like workers' comp issues. If somebody gets hurt, who's going to pay for this? The other thing is they take care of purchase orders. They take care of the accounting. So if we need fuel and we have to go down to the corner market and say, I'm out of fuel in my truck, I need some fuel, but I don't have an account, a credit card, whatever, they're the people that you're going to have to call to set that up. Now, finance admin people are not often used by certain teams, but just be aware somebody has to have an accounting of that. If you're not going to do it, then you're going to answer to whoever is in that upline from you to do that. So when we start talking about operations, okay, we talked about just a little bit, they're the folks who actually get things done. You got to have a command structure. You want to have your incident commander or your team lead. You want to establish some kind of command post, and then have this structure expandable as needed. Now, one thing we hadn't talked about that this particular section discusses is dealing with the media. Any of you ever had any experience dealing with the media? That's a fun job, isn't it? What was your experience?
It's been a couple of different TV programs speaking on news, Bollywood, or just things about the Veterans Association.
Mm-hmm. Media, a lot of people are nervous about the media. the best way to handle it, particularly as a CERT team member, is to refer them to somebody a little bit more in that command role.
Deflect.
You could deflect, that's a good word, deflect. You really got to be careful about the information released. Because, and again, you can hear, there could be a lot of hearsay out there. There could be a lot of discussion. And it wind up not being true. So you really need to be very careful. And the best thing to do is, by the time an event, a big event, there will be other responders. This is by now, we're getting elected officials, we're getting government officials, emergency management, fire chief, police chief, we're getting those folks involved that are in more of a command type role, and the easiest thing to do is let them do that. Now, with that said, don't necessarily be ugly to the media, by all means. Media can make you look really, really bad. The thing about it is, most of the time, the media is not going to understand your role as a CERT member. Most people really doesn't know what we do. They don't understand what the role of CERT
They're
is.
gonna have their contacts anyways usually they're gonna have some type of contact for an incident anyways. If it's a major incident, they're gonna have some type of source to go to anyways for.
Usually, and that's what we want to do, especially, like I say, that's the reason the incident command system works well, because if you use it at all levels, what will happen is that there will be a structure building above you that you will be actually plugged into. So as you're building the incident command system, part of the command staff is a PIO, a public information officer. So the overall incident commander will have somebody designated to be a public information officer for that event. And that's what you need to know when you're dealing with the media. So once the reporters pull up and they begin to want information, you would simply have to refer them, you know, I'm sorry, I really don't have this information. What you need to do is go to the command post and ask for the public information officer. And so what that brings us up to is a discussion about NIMS, National Incident Management System. And so with that, let's take a short break, and then we'll come back and talk more about NIMS compliance and take further questions. Thank you.